There we are, Jo. That's the important thing.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Clare Moncrieff. You just heard a little bit about my role, and I'll say a little bit about TalentNeuron and then move very quickly on to our case study today and to Jo's experiences. But TalentNeuron essentially established the market for labor and talent intelligence. So we are a labor markets analytics organization. If you want to learn a little more about us, we have a booth downstairs just to the left at the bottom of the stairs. But we're in the business of providing in-depth global labor market data to help organizations make difficult decisions on topics like location, workforce planning, strategic sourcing. And over our 20 years in business, we built a data infrastructure and methodology, which I'll talk a little bit about today, to harvest talent supply, demand, cost, and competition data from 35,000 sources globally to help our clients make these difficult decisions. Today, we provide our data in a variety of ways. Some of it's a self-service platform. Some of it's a little more bespoke. We're going to talk about some of the little more bespoke work today with Jo. So, Jo, let me turn it over to you to introduce yourself and set a little context on who Sage is.
Yeah, so I'm Jo Thackray. As I said, we work as a software accounting company. I work as Strategic Workforce Planning Director in Sage, and we've been running Sage since starting from humble beginnings in Newcastle over 40 years ago. We support businesses, small, medium, predominantly with software, whether that be payroll, accounting, and even more recently, we've gone into carbon footprint monitoring. So we're trying to help businesses run their business in the easiest way possible. And we support over 20 million employees worldwide with payroll products. We don't employ them, but organizations across the globe who have employees, we help them pay their employees effectively. We've got over 95,000 partners around the world, including 80,000 accountants that we help support, and over 300,000 customers who help run the business. As an organisation ourselves, we're a FTSE 100 company, and we've been nominated by Glassdoor and comparably as a great place to work. And during the pandemic, we're really proud that our CEO was nominated as one of the top CEOs for leading the business through that period, which was tough for all of us, I think. So that's a little bit about Sage. My background personally, I've worked in HR for over 20 years. I've worked in a variety of roles, from business partnering through to L&D. I did a little bit of a business executive role for our chief people officer. I've also done some organisational development. So I've worked around in HR quite a bit. But my current role is focused on strategic workforce planning. And I'll just tell you a little bit about why that came about. So within Sage, we recently did a review of our HR operating model with Deloitte. We looked at how we were doing business partnering, how we were doing running our people services, how we were doing talent acquisition, and we deep dived into that with them to really find out, okay, how do we need to move with the fast pace of technology and with how HR is changing and how we need to service the business. And one of the things that they came up with is that actually we need to have a focus on organisation effectiveness. And for those of you obviously who work in HR functions, you'll know that working in HR is a really tightrope between getting that commercial side and making sure that we're bringing cost to the business in an effective way, whilst also getting the balance of looking after our people, making sure they're engaged and making sure that they're doing what they need to do and they're empowered to deliver our strategy. So this is an area that we decided to set up, and I'm part of that, working with our transformation teams in order to really establish a centre of expertise around organisational effectiveness, and with that also working very closely with our people analytics team, some of which are in the audience today. I'm going to say hi to Nani, and hopefully we've got Seb somewhere as well. So working closely with them, but also partnering very closely with the business as well in terms of understanding what do our functions need to do in order to be more effective with their workforce. So one of the first things we've looked at is really understanding how we align our budgets. And we've been very good in Sage at every year doing the annual budgeting process where we dive deep into, okay, what headcount do we need for next year? And it's been very much finance driven. You know, as you said before, you know, we're standing toe to toe with finance, and we need to actually change the balance of that and say, actually, the workforce side and the people side and how we do that is just as important. It's not just about the numbers, and we've been very focused on the numbers previously when we've been doing our budgeting and business planning processes. So what we looked at is said, okay, there's lots we can go after here to improve this when we looked at the workforce data. So we've narrowed it down to a few key things. One being high performance culture. So making sure that, you know, we're performing the best that we can, and we're setting our managers, leaders and colleagues up for success. The second was around location strategy, and we're an organisation that's grown over the years through acquisition from them small humble beginnings in Newcastle, where we started as a small software accounting company, to having lots of locations around the world. And as we buy smaller businesses up, obviously with that comes all of their offices, all of their people. And we probably haven't been doing that in the most effective way, because we like to keep hold of that knowledge in order to ensure that that product continues to succeed. We're not one of these organisations that likes to suck a new business up and then change it into our, I guess, entrenched ways of working. We want them to thrive as a business within Sage. So we've got a lot of locations that we knew that we needed to look at and pay attention to as to whether we needed all of those locations. And then the next element was around sourcing. So, you know, are we sourcing our talent in the right way? You know, are we bringing in things like early careers? Are there opportunities for outsourcing? Do we need this talent all of the time? You know, every year our talent acquisition teams were frankly exhausted because we've been recruiting around about 3,000 people every year. Now, bear in mind, we're an organisation of only 11,000 people. That is a lot of recruiting every year. So every, 3 to 4 years, we're essentially replacing ourselves because we're not being strategic in how we source and how we recruit. And then the last two bits are around organisation, structure, and also health. So there's been a lot of talk over that yesterday, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again today, about organisation structure and how data and analytics can help us understand, have we got the right mix of things like spans and layers? Have we got the right number of managers? Are we top heavy? Looking and deep diving into all of those things to make sure we've got that right. And what we've done is we've come up with some organisational health measures to help us determine for Sage what is the right organisational health when it comes to workforce for us. And Nanny's been helping us do that as well. And we've given our leaders a heat map to help them understand where are the areas of focus that they could focus on. So where we've got functions that are maybe a bit top heavy or maybe not utilising enough early careers, we're highlighting that and putting the mirror really in their face to say, were you aware of this or not? What can we do about it? And it's not necessarily to hold them to account, but it's just to use that data as power to say, actually, there's some stuff here that you could pay attention to in order to be more effective. So how are we doing this? Well, we're doing this through strategic workforce planning, and it's pretty new for Sage. We did a small pilot starting a couple of years ago in one of our product departments. That went really well, and what came out of that pilot was actually, we needed to focus on data. You've seen how many partners we work with, how many employees we service around the world to make sure they're paid. We've got a lot of data in Sage that we can utilise, and we need to utilise that in the right way. So one of the first things that came out of strategic workforce planning is actually we need to stand up a data office and making sure we're doing that in the right way. So the strategic workforce planning that we went through was with Mercer, and it was really good, and it really highlighted, actually, we shouldn't just be doing this with one function, we should be doing this across the business. So that's the lever that we're using in order to take this from a small pilot to take it right around our function and touch everything. But we're very, very early in this journey. So my role only started about a year ago, so it's very new. It's very new to me. I hadn't done strategic workforce plan before. I've been on a steep learning curve over the last year, trying to win hearts and minds in the business that this is important and why we need to do it. So at the moment, as I said, we're very focused on headcount and data analysis and budgeting. We're very good at that. We're very tactical. But where we want to get to is we want to be more operational, but ultimately we want to get leaders looking at, okay, so what workforce do you need next year? Actually, what workforce do you need in 3 to 5 years' time? What's your business strategy? How are you going to get there? What's the talent that you need? What's the skills that you need to deliver that? So rather than thinking about short term, about next year, think about what do you actually need to deliver that 3-year plan that you've got.
And so, Jo, let's talk a little bit about what that means from an analytics perspective. Where does analytics fit into this picture?
So again, from a maturity point of view, we've been doing HR reporting for a lot of years. We've got a great people analytics team. We actually have just moved some of our reporting into our people service centre, and we've been servicing the business with HR reporting for many years. But we need to change that. And as part of the strategic workforce planning work we've been doing is actually to get more analytical. And we're trying to now focus on not just reporting retrospectively, but actually thinking about, okay, how could we use some predictive analytics in order to model some of the things that we want to achieve in the next 3 years? So really, pushing our teams to say, okay, if you move this workforce to here, you could save this amount, or if you change the shape, or if you reduce this amount of layers in this area of the business, this is what you would get. So we're really pushing around looking forward rather than looking backwards is what we've done in the past.
I think it's really interesting that the transformation office in which Jo and her team sit report directly to the CEO at Sage. So although this organization is doing work with HR and having to get buy-in from HR stakeholders, because of course it's all about people, they also are kind of operating a little bit as consultants to the business, and the analytics helps you do that, doesn't it? Because it brings a little bit of that objectivity and data to bear in the conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a lot of problems to solve.
Yes, let's talk a little bit about what some of those are.
So just to share with you some of the problems that we're trying to solve. So increasing human capital costs. We've grown over the last 40 years, quite fast. And with that, the workforce has grown. And, as the more we buy in businesses, and the more that we do for the strategy, the more we seem to think that actually buying in more talent is the answer. So our human capital costs have reached a point where we said actually we need to start getting control of this. We've been backfilling like for like. So like I said, 3,000 hires a year is a lot for a business of our size. So we want to change that from just mindlessly thinking, okay, that person's left. Currently we've got 7% attrition. Rather than thinking about replacing that 7% like for like, we need to think differently. Do we need those roles? Do we need those skills in the future? And should we be pausing to think about how we do that differently to achieve what we want? As I said, years of acquisition, so we've got lots of locations around the world now, lots of offices. So again, pausing and thinking which offices are going to serve us correctly, which offices have the right talent supply and demand that we need to bring into the business. Aging workforce, again, through acquisition, we like to keep the founders of the businesses that we buy and the knowledge and the engineers that come with that who've built our products. But actually, when we started looking into this data a bit more, we realised that some of those people are going to actually want to retire in the next few years. So we need to make a plan to not only help them retire easily, but actually start moving some of that knowledge. And then at the opposite end of the scale, what we found was our early talent pipeline. We bring in lots of grads and lots of interns and apprentices every year, but they were leaving quite quickly. And some of that is because they've hit a glass ceiling, or because we've got an older workforce that just aren't leaving because we want to retain them for the knowledge. So we need to change the mix of that. And then lastly, attracting talent. So as I said, we've started in Newcastle. That's our flagship, or our head office, so to speak. But we've also got another flagship in the US where we started, and we've got a big presence in the US as well. but we're really struggling to attract talent in those places. So looking at in Newcastle, we've saturated the market. Newcastle is a small city in the north of England. I'm sure many of you know, but the tech talent and the engineers maybe isn't quite there. So we need to look broader at that. And then conversely, in the US, we're based in Atlanta. We're not really well known in the US. We're a really small fish in a big sea. So people don't really want to come to Sage because they've never heard of us. So we've got two different challenges with some of our flagship locations that we need to.
And we'll talk a little bit more about what we learned from the data in these two locations and others that started to change the conversation at Sage. I think these lists of problems probably look very familiar to people in this room, especially those of you that are doing strategic workforce planning. And of course, they represent a tremendous opportunity for us as analytics experts to bring data to bear against these questions and to drive different in kind conversations. So let's talk a little bit about where you realized that you wanted to bring more data into your conversations, Jo.
Yeah, so as I said, we started in the last year focusing on strategic workforce planning across the business. So working in partnership with transformation team, with function leaders, with our people business partners to do that. And the model that we're using is similar to many models that are out there about we're getting them to deep dive into what is your business strategy for the next 3 to 5 years? What do you want to achieve? What's your ambition? Then getting into the detail of, okay, what's the current workforce you've got? What does that look like? Overlaying that heat map to say, were you aware you've got an aging workforce here? Were you aware that your spans and layers look a bit off there? And really putting that in their face. And then the next bit is about segmenting their roles and getting them to think about, okay, which of the roles that you really need going forward to help deliver the strategy? Have you got the skills and the talent that you need right now? And actually, which are the roles that you're not going to need in order to deliver this strategy? And we might need to phase those out. But then I think the most important part is also, which is a step change for us in Sage, is about not just looking internally, but looking more externally at what's going on in the environment and scanning the environment around doing a good old pestle. We all love a pestle. I always thought at university, I'll never use this again. But actually, I've never used it so much in the last 12 months. And it's been really helpful to help us think, especially with how the pace of change and how fast economies and things happen. It's so important to start diving into that, and we've actually got our risk team to help us with that and do some future gazing onto what are the impacts that might have on our workforce.
And that's also partly where TalentNeuron came in. So this was where we formed our partnership, but then of course TalentNeuron also informed the scenario planning, the gap analysis, and the action planning, and the 6 Bs that are being used at Sage in workforce planning. So this is where we brought our data to bear, and I want to say a few words now about the kind of data that we shared with Sage, and then we're going to talk about the kind of conversations that it drove. So on the next page, as I mentioned, we provide tremendous amount of data, and across the top, you'll see just some of the different methodologies that we use to collect and to analyze the data that we share with our clients. Supply data, demand data, salary, top skills and titles. A lot of these are informed by AI. Although AI is a very hot topic these days, we've actually been using it in our products for over 20 years, together with machine learning, and we're always refining our algorithms to ensure that we're providing the highest quality data that we can. So in the case of Sage, and you'll notice as you look across some of the data that we're pulling here, the numbers are kind of big. We looked across 30 different locations in 14 countries, 32 job families in 6 different functions. We looked at multiple additional parameters, including things like competitors, macroeconomic parameters, levels of experience, a wide variety of additional data that we brought to bear and then triangulated from several different angles to start to reveal the patterns in the data and the information that it was telling us that it could tell Sage that could contextualize their internal data quite differently. And then finally, we summarized here the exact number of data points. I know this is an audience that values precision. Almost 18,000 data points we analyzed for Sage. And that's the beginning of the conversation that we're having. So of course, you all know having lots of data is one thing, but what's really hard is how you summarize and bring it to bear in the conversations. And Amit gave us some great examples of how do you actually have the right conversation using this data. And we want to share a little bit of that process with you as well, how we built that partnership and what we did with all this data. So the first thing we did was form a steering committee. So the steering committee was formed between Jo and her core team and me and my core team at TalentNeuron. And then we provided this initial set of data for the first function that we looked at. And we did this work for 6 different functions, overlapping, but sequentially. So we started, I think, with the legal function. We pulled together some initial analysis, and then we brought it to stage for a conversation.
Yeah, and we worked together, and actually we shared it before we put it in front of the business, we shared it with our people partners and talent acquisition to say, how does this look? You know, what do you think, how's the business going to react to this? And we were able to sort of tailor the presentation.
That's right, that's exactly what we did next, in fact, was we curated the data then to bring it to the leadership teams. So for each of these 6 functional sets of data, we went and met with the leader of the function and their leadership team and discussed the data and the implications for their function. So we curated that, and then I facilitated those conversations with those leadership teams to bring the insights out of the data. Yeah. And then you took the data back after that.
We did, and I just want to say as well, you know, we talk about power, but there's definitely power in bringing external people in, and I honestly think if internally, if we as a team had presented the data, it wouldn't have had the same impact with our leaders as what Clare did. Clare does a really good job of presenting, and you're able to take the challenge from the leaders as they throw it at you as well, because you're so into the data, and that gave us power and really started to turn heads with our leadership, because I don't know if everybody experiences the same, but for some reason, when internal people present data, it's really not as powerful as when external people come in and present it.
But I would counter that by saying that it was your internal people who helped set us up for those right conversations. And to Amit's point, you know, having the other HR colleagues bought in and giving us the heads up, what are the politics in this meeting going to be? What kinds of questions are you likely to get? Where are the pain points? Where are the difficult bits? Was actually critical in setting those conversations up for success.
Yeah. So then that enabled us, you know, that was a platform enabled us to continue where we are today, which is now having those deeper conversations where we're talking about, okay, based on the data that you've seen, what are the scenarios that we need to plan for? And then that's going to take us into our action planning. And we're just about getting into our action planning now, which we're really excited about. And for the first time, we'll have action plans for 6 or 7 areas of the business, rather than previously we just had one that we looked at.
And what we're going to do now is, of course, take all of the insights from the 6 different functions and roll them up and provide Sage back with a view of here are the themes we're seeing overall from the external labor market perspective. Here are some recommendations we have for you, and here are some next steps and actions that you might want to take. We were also very pleased that we met Sage's request of fast tracking this. So we generated a lot of data in a short period of time. We drove these conversations and all of this work across a 6-month period, which was in line with their goals. And now we wanted to share with you some of the interesting insights that emerged from all this data. You know, what actually came out of the conversations. So the first 2 bullet points here are about locations. So there are some locations where Sage, you know, perhaps is needing to look at different talent strategies. Jo intimated that a little bit in some of the locations where they're more well-known or less well-known, for example. She also talked a little bit about locations being, maybe there are too many of them. You know, they acquired a lot of them. How do they make really informed decisions about which locations they want to be in? And then a lot of that came back to the future talent needs of the business as AI is going to influence work and how it gets done, and technology is changing how work gets done. But what does that mean for attracting talent in markets where your brand may not be well known, and now your work is also going to change? How do you attract people into a situation like that? And we did talk a lot and continue to talk about the employment value proposition, or the EVP, didn't we, Jo?
Yeah. Yeah, and that came out loud and clear for us, where, you know, we could do more work on that as well.
So, for example, we also talked at the bottom, there were a couple of points about, that's okay, cost and location. That we also found there were cost implications to the data that perhaps Sage hadn't been thinking about that way. So the last point was about overly restrictive skills requirements from the business. And I'm sure that this has never happened to any of you, but occasionally business leaders ask for job descriptions that are very precise, and they're looking for very specific skill sets. And that does happen sometimes also at Sage. And so in marketing, as an example, we wanted to show you how the data changed the conversation on this. The requirement at Sage has traditionally been that ideally you want to hire marketers who have experience in SaaS or software as a service, who've worked in that industry before, who have the skill set. We were able to illustrate that in one particular American city, which is an important one for Sage, if you look for marketing talent in general, there's an addressable labor market of about 28,000 individuals. If you start layering in skills requirements, and the second layer there is an or set. So if you start to say, well, we'd like to have SaaS or CRM or Salesforce, your addressable market goes down to 5,000 people in this particular city. And if you require SaaS as a skill, you've got 2,000 people. Suddenly, this opened up the conversation in the marketing function around why has it been so difficult to find talent? Why is it so expensive? Why do we have to go to other cities like New York and Boston to find the kind of skill sets we want, when in fact, there are other solutions in the cities where you may wish to be? Right, Jo? And we talked about what you could do instead. And what was the big aha moment for the chief marketing officer?
Yeah, so, asking our talent teams to stop including SaaS in their job descriptions was just a massive aha moment, because we knew from the data that TalentNeuron was saying that we were just restricting ourselves so much, and we've got this wide pool of talent that we could be drawing on. But because we're being so restrictive on SaaS, then we're not getting that. But actually SaaS is really easy to train. So we should be just bringing people in regardless, and then focusing our inductions and our training programs on training the SaaS bit, because the most fundamental bit was about having those marketing skills, and similarly for our sales functions as well.
So this is one of the actions that Sage is planning to take as a result of the work. Let's take a look at some of the others. And I know you've got a lot of really interesting actions you're planning to take here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're really changing the way we think about location, as I've said, the skills that we advertise for, to that example just before, even language proficiency. So looking at actually where should we be focusing on locations or building talent in locations where we can do multilingual support, rather than thinking and having maybe one hub in Europe rather than, the 10 or 20 we've got already. Other things like, what are the skills? We've really dived into what have our competitors been using in their adverts in terms of advertising skills. We'd not really looked at it with that lens before, and thinking, if they're advertising these roles with those skills requirements, maybe we should be doing that as well. And then the employer value proposition. So, we've got more work coming on that, where we can really think differently about how we're attracting talent, particularly in the US, where we're not as well known. I think another thing you identified was the passive talent sourcing. So what are the locations where we've actively saturated the market, a bit like Newcastle. So we need to work a bit harder and maybe go and do some passive talent sourcing, tap a few people on the shoulder to say, come and work for us, we're a great place to work. And the big one for me certainly is early careers. So, we're not doing enough to bring in that early talent pipeline. So TalentNeuron are really helping us identify where are the locations that have got great universities that we can nurture that talent and bring that talent in at either a graduate or intern or apprenticeship level.
And we wanted to share some of the learnings of our journey together so far with you. So that's what this next page is all about. First of all, we discovered that engaging the right stakeholders with the right data is actually very critical. And that's why we went through the process we shared with you to really refine and curate that data, to meet those leaders where they were, to appreciate the political situation we were walking into, the hot buttons, the challenges, the vested interests, and to identify where we could inflect change, perhaps, in those conversations. We also, when you look at internal data in the context of the external labor market, it looks different. The context in which you're interpreting it is different. I think you've heard that from other speakers before. It certainly opened the conversation within Sage and allowed us to question the status quo in a bit of a non-threatening way. Why is it that we've been doing things this way? Why are we still doing it that way? Maybe there are other alternative ways to do things. And that opened up some really interesting discussion. We looked at different depth of data. So in some cases, really deep dives were critical for decision making. In other cases, a high-level steer was sufficient. And so really varying that depth of data to the need of the decision-making conversation in question was important. And then we were also able to look at sort of changes of appetite for this data-driven insight. And the last bullet there was an interesting one, Jo, because you said you were a little worried about bringing all this data into these conversations,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Some of the packs that we brought in, there was, over 100 slides. And what we found is, Claire went through a summary. We did executive summaries in the session and spent about an hour with our leaders having a good discussion about the data. But immediately after, the leaders were like, can I have the pack? I want to dive into it. And that was a refreshing change, because I actually thought they would go, oh, too much, don't want to know. But yeah, it was nice to see that.
And I think it changed the conversation with your head of HR as well, right? One of the really powerful things was the meeting we had with the people team. So we did this data for the people function. We brought that in and had a conversation with them about it. And she said something really powerful.
Yeah, so, we had a location strategy. We'd focused on the areas that we wanted to, working with our property department and looking at it from a finance point of view. And she was adamant that we were to follow this strategy, what we've already agreed. But as we started bringing in the talent lens with TalentNeuron, she really started changing her mind and saying, actually, there's some areas that we've said we're gonna focus on that we need to question that. And now we think, if there's no talent and supply demand there, is that the right location for us? So it's really changed mindsets all the way up to executive levels. So
it has. Good. And this is our last slide. We just wanted to highlight a couple of the additional areas that we're going to be using data to dive into at Sage. But I know we're slightly over time, so we'll stop here and join the panel and answer any questions that you have. But thank you for having us. And do come down and visit our booth. We'd love to tell you a little bit more about what we do at TalentNeuron. Thank you.